How did families on the frontier sleep in log cabins? And how did they survive in dangerous conditions? You will be shocked to learn the details. The romantic image of a log cabin, with its cozy hearth and sense of security, is firmly embedded in our consciousness. We imagine sound sleep to the crackling of logs after a long day of exploring the wilderness. But what if I told you that the reality of sleep on the American frontier was far from this idyllic picture and more like a daily struggle for survival? It was a battle against the cold, harsh conditions and a complete lack of what we today call comfort. Every detail of the sleeping area, from the filling in the mattress to the way the ropes were stretched, was the result of harsh necessity and remarkable ingenuity. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple rope was the key to a comfortable night's sleep and why the warmest bed in the house was also the most vulnerable. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of pioneer survival, which was hidden right under their feet. For a family that had just finished building the walls and roof of their first log cabin, the question of furniture did not even arise. The first and only sleeping surface was the floor itself, which was rarely wooden. Building a wooden floor required time, tools, and skills that many newcomers simply did not have in the first weeks and months. Most often, it was simply packed earth, sometimes covered with a layer of clay or sand for relative cleanliness. Sleeping on such a surface was a test of endurance, where the cold and dampness coming from the ground were constant companions. It was a basic form of shelter, where the walls protected from the wind, but not from the nighttime cold from below. The earthen floor was uneven, with bumps and hollows that dug into the body during sleep. Clay was used to create a smoother surface. It was mixed with water to the consistency of thick porridge, applied to the compacted earth, and smoothed out. After drying, it resulted in a relatively hard and even surface that was easier to keep clean. Sand was simply poured over the ground in a thick layer. It absorbed moisture and also created a cleaner environment, although it did not solve the problem of cold. To insulate themselves from the frozen ground in some way, the settlers used everything that the surrounding nature provided. A thick layer of pine branches, dry grass, or fallen leaves served as a primitive mattress. These materials created an air layer that slightly softened the hardness and retained body heat. Pine branches had the advantage that their needles repelled some insects with their smell. The layer of such bedding had to be thick enough, at least 20 centimeters, to really work as insulation. The material was regularly replaced as it quickly became compacted and lost its properties. Moisture from breathing and body heat penetrated the bedding, making it damp and cold. Therefore, every few days, the old branches and leaves were thrown away and replaced with fresh ones. The whole family usually slept together, huddled together in one corner to keep warm. This was not a tradition, but a necessity in conditions where a single hearth could not heat the entire house. Animal skins, if available, served as a common blanket under which people sought refuge from the icy drafts. The warmth of their bodies created a microclimate under the skins that helped them survive the night. Parents usually lay at the edges, creating a protective barrier for the children who slept in the middle. This gave the younger members of the family maximum warmth and safety. Such sleep was far from comfortable, and people often woke up when someone moved or when the edge of the blanket lifted due to the cold. But there was no alternative, and families learned to sleep in such conditions. This first stage was the most severe and required tremendous endurance from people. Sleep was not rest, but rather a temporary respite before a new day of hard labor. It was here, on the cold earthen floor, that the pioneer's character was tempered. Those who could not endure these conditions quickly returned to the east or sought more settled communities. In the morning, people woke up with stiff muscles, sore backs, and the feeling that they had not slept at all.
Morning, my love.
But they had to start a new day full of hard physical labor. This constant fatigue was the norm during the first months on the frontier. The body gradually adapted, but it was impossible to get completely used to such conditions. The very act of sleeping on the floor inside one's own home was an important psychological step. It meant that the first milestone had been reached. There was a roof over one's head. It was a modest but significant achievement, transforming the wilderness into a territory that could begin to be called home. 4 walls and a roof created a boundary between civilization and wilderness. even if it was almost as cold inside as it was outside. Gradually, the earthen floor gave way to wooden flooring, but this did not happen immediately. For many families, their first winter was spent in such primitive conditions. This experience remained forever etched in their memory as a reminder of where their journey had begun. Wooden floors only appeared when there were enough boards and time to lay them, sometimes not until the second year of living in the new house. The feeling of hard, cold earth under their backs every night was a harsh reality. It shaped their attitude toward comfort as a real luxury, not something to be taken for granted. The simple comforts that would come later were valued immeasurably more. The first real bed, the first straw-filled mattress, seemed like an incredible luxury after months of sleeping on the ground. This experience of sleeping on the floor was fundamental. It emphasized that survival on the frontier began with the basics. Before thinking about beds and mattresses, one simply had to learn to sleep and wake up in a new, uninhabited world. This experience also taught humility and gratitude for the slightest improvements in living conditions. Do you think you could fall asleep on a dirt floor, knowing that wild nature surrounds you behind thin walls? Share your opinion in the comments. What if I told you that the first bed in a log cabin was not a piece of furniture, but part of the house itself? After the first harsh winter on the floor, creating a real sleeping place became a priority. But with a shortage of tools, time, and space, the settlers did not build beds as we understand them today. A freestanding bed required too many boards and fasteners, which were simply not available. The most logical and economical solution was a bed built directly into the log cabin structure. It was usually placed in a corner, using two walls of the house as a natural headboard and side backrest. This saved both materials and precious space in the only room. The corner was also the warmest place in the house, protected from drafts on two sides. The design was ingenious in its simplicity. Two thick logs or beams were driven or inserted into pre-drilled holes in the walls at the required height. Crosswise boards or thinner poles were laid on top of them, which served as the base for the sleeping area. The height was usually about half a meter from the floor, which provided sufficient insulation from the cold coming from the ground. The logs inserted into the walls were held in place by friction and the weight of the entire structure. Sometimes they were additionally secured with wooden wedges or simple nails, if available. The main thing was to ensure that these load-bearing elements did not bend under the weight of sleeping people and did not slip out of the holes. The only support touching the floor was a single leg in the far corner away from the walls. Such a one-legged bed was incredibly strong and stable, as the main weight was borne by the load-bearing walls of the house. It became an integral part of the interior, rather than a freestanding object. This leg was usually made of a thick log or several bars fastened together. Such beds were often made two-tiered to accommodate more people in the same space. The lower tier was intended for older family members, and the upper tier for children or teenagers. This was the first and most important improvement in everyday life, lifting the family off the cold floor. The upper tier was even warmer as warm air from the hearth rose upward. The design of the second tier was the same as the first, only it was located 1.5 meters higher. Access to the upper tier was via a simple ladder or even steps in the wall. Children quickly got used to climbing up to their sleeping places and climbing down from them, even in the dark. The space under the lower bed was also put to good use. Tools and supplies were stored there, or a low pull-out bed on wheels, known as a trundle bed, was made. It was the perfect solution for accommodating all members of a large family. During the day, the trundle bed was pushed under the main bed, freeing up space for living, and at night it was rolled out, turning into an extra sleeping place. Such built-in furniture dictated the entire layout of the room. The location of the hearth, table, and workbench depended on which corner was chosen for sleeping. The family's life literally revolved around this immovable sleeping center. Usually, the bed was built in the corner opposite the entrance door so that sleepers were as far away as possible from the cold air rushing in when the door was open. Although this was a huge step forward compared to sleeping on the floor, such a bed offered little comfort. The hard, uneven boards were only slightly better than the packed earth. The same skins and homemade mattresses were still laid on top of them. The boards were often roughly hewn, with splinters and unevenness that could be felt even through the layer of bedding. The materials for such a bed were taken directly from the surrounding forest. The settler used the same axe and drill that he used to build the entire house. It was carpentry work that required strength and ingenuity, not fine furniture craftsmanship. The boards were split from logs with wedges, hewn with an axe, and drilled with a primitive drill. This simple design solved the problem of space, but not comfort. Ready to find out how a simple rope revolutionized the sleeping habits of pioneers and turned hard boards into something resembling a modern bed? The secret passed down from generation to generation lay in a simple weave of ropes. When settlers moved from built-in beds to freestanding ones, they faced the problem of creating a comfortable and resilient base. The solution that defined the look of bedrooms for decades to come was the rope bed. It was a simple wooden frame, usually made of maple or poplar, with 4 legs. Its main feature was not the legs, but the rows of holes or wooden pegs located around the entire perimeter of the inner part of the frame. It was through these that the rope was threaded, creating a base for the mattress. A strong rope made of hemp or other natural fiber was first stretched lengthwise and then crosswise along the frame. The result was a dense mesh resembling a modern trampoline in structure. This mesh was strong enough to support the weight of several people, while also possessing a springiness unattainable by solid boards. The main drawback of this system was that over time the ropes stretched and sagged. Sleeping on such a bed became uncomfortable as the body sank into the middle. This gave rise to a regular household chore, tightening the ropes. There was a special tool for this purpose, known as a bed key or rope wrench. It was a simple wooden or metal lever with a groove that allowed you to grab the rope and pull it tight by throwing it over the next peg. The process was laborious and required physical strength. It was from this routine procedure that the famous English phrase, sleep tight, was born. The wish for a good night's sleep in those days had a literal meaning. It meant sleeping on tightly stretched, tight ropes. This simple wish reflected the whole technology of comfort of that era. The rope system was a real breakthrough. It ensured air circulation under the mattress, preventing moisture accumulation. In addition, such a bed was relatively light and could be disassembled for transportation, which was important for the mobile lifestyle of the pioneers. The quality of sleep depended directly on the quality of the rope and the ability to tighten it correctly. Too little tension created an uncomfortable hammock. Too much tension made the bed unnecessarily stiff and could damage the wooden frame. Rope beds were standard throughout most of the 19th century. They were found in modest log cabins and in more affluent farmhouses. This technology became a symbol of the era, a simple and effective solution to the fundamental human need for rest. The history of the rope bed is a story of how simple materials gave rise to ingenious engineering solutions. It shows that comfort is not only about softness, but also about proper support.
Human comfort.
Pioneers understood this long before the invention of modern orthopedic mattresses. What I am about to show you will determine whether you sleep like a king or a pauper. Even the best rope bed was useless without a mattress, or, as it was then called, a tick. It was a simple but very important element of the bed, consisting of a large bag of coarse fabric known as a tick. This tick was sewn from durable homespun canvas or burlap. It had a special opening through which it was stuffed with filling. It was the contents of this bag that determined the level of comfort, social status, and even the health of its owner. For most families, straw was the most affordable and common filling. After the harvest, there was an abundance of it, and it cost nothing. A straw mattress was hard, prickly, and quickly became lumpy and uncomfortable. A slightly better alternative was dry leaves, especially oak or beech leaves, which retained their elasticity longer. Another popular option was corn cobs without kernels in their husks. This filling was slightly softer than straw, but it rustled loudly with every movement. All of these plant-based fillings had one serious drawback. They quickly turned to dust. This dust was everywhere, settling on furniture and getting into people's lungs. In addition, mattresses had to be shaken regularly, and their contents changed to avoid lumps and maintain at least some shape. The process of changing the filling was a whole ritual. The old contents were taken out into the yard and often burned. The tick bag was thoroughly washed and dried in the sun, after which it was filled with a fresh portion of straw or leaves. Rarer and more expensive fillings were considered a real step towards comfort. Sometimes horsehair or wool was added to mattresses which were much more elastic and durable than straw. In some regions, cattail down was used, which was surprisingly soft, but its collection was laborious. The height of luxury and a sign of wealth was a feather mattress or feather bed. It was stuffed with goose or duck feathers, which were carefully collected, washed, and dried. Sleeping on such a feather bed was incredibly soft and warm. Having a feather bed in the house meant that the family was well established. It was often one of the most valuable items in the house and was passed down from generation to generation. It was a symbol of the transition from mere survival to a stable and comfortable life. Thus, the contents of the mattress were a kind of chronicle of the family's success. The path from prickly straw to soft feathers was long and difficult. It reflected the hard work and perseverance necessary to build a new life on the frontier of civilization. Having secured a minimum level of comfort, the settlers faced a new invisible problem, the cold that penetrated from all sides. In the next chapter, you will learn what tricks they used to keep warm on freezing nights. Despite its massiveness, the log house was full of drafts. The clay or moss filling between the logs, called chinking, dried out and cracked over time, allowing the icy wind to blow inside. Therefore, fighting the cold at night was a top priority. Even in a relatively new house where the joints had been carefully sealed, constant temperature fluctuations destroyed the airtightness of the walls. The main source of heat was a large fireplace or hearth, which burned day and night. The location of the beds in the room depended directly on it. The warmest and most honorable place was by the hearth, but it was also the most dangerous due to the risk of flying sparks. Therefore, beds were usually placed a few meters away from the fire, where the heat could still be felt, but the risk of fire was minimal. To prepare the bed for sleep on particularly cold nights, special bed warmers were used. These were metal containers, similar to a frying pan, with a long handle and a lid with holes. They put hot coals from the hearth inside and quickly ran the warmer between the sheets to warm them up. This had to be done carefully, as the coals could spill out and burn the fabric or cause a fire. The hot water bottle was moved over the entire surface of the bed, paying special attention to the area where the feet would be, as cold feet made it almost impossible to fall asleep. After warming up, the hot water bottle was returned to the hearth, and the person quickly got under the blankets before the heat dissipated. Some families also used heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth, which were placed at the foot of the bed and kept warm all night. However, the main means of protection from the cold was the bedding itself. There was a lot of it, and each layer played its own role. The base was made of linen or cotton sheets if the family could afford them. Linen was more accessible in the north, where it was grown, while cotton came from the south and was more expensive. Numerous blankets and bedspreads were laid on top of the sheets. The most valuable were heavy wool blankets, which retained heat very well. Quilts were often used, which women sewed from scraps of old clothes, creating true works of folk art. Quilts were not only practical, they also carried family stories, as each scrap could be part of a father's shirt or mother's dress. Wool blankets were made from sheep kept on the farm. The wool was sheared, washed, combed, and spun by hand, then woven on a simple home loom. The entire process from sheep to finished blanket took months of work. Therefore, each blanket was valued like gold and passed down from generation to generation. The top layer, providing maximum insulation, was made of animal skins. Heavy buffalo or bear skins were the best protection against the most severe frost. They were so heavy that they literally pressed the sleepers to the bed. Such a skin could weigh up to 10 to 15 kilograms, creating the feeling of sleeping under a load. The whole family often slept under one or two large blankets, using each other's body heat. This was the most effective and ancient way to keep warm. The more people there were in bed, the warmer it was to sleep. Sleeping together also strengthened family ties and gave children a sense of security during the long dark nights. Nightcaps were often worn on the head. This seemingly old-fashioned piece of clothing was absolutely necessary. A significant amount of body heat escapes through the head, and the cap helped to retain it. Caps were made of flannel or other soft, warm fabric, often with long ties to keep them from slipping off during sleep. Some settlers placed screens around their beds or hung additional curtains. This created a small enclosed space that warmed up faster from breathing and cooled down more slowly. Every degree of warmth counted. These curtains were made from any fabric available, even old blankets or burlap, as long as they created an additional barrier against the cold air. Thus, nighttime sleep was a whole system of procedures and devices aimed at preserving precious heat. From hot coals in a hot water bottle to a nightcap, everything served one purpose: to survive the cold night and meet the dawn in warmth and health. Are you ready for the shocking truth about the most desirable sleeping area in a log cabin? As the family grew, space in the only room became a real shortage, and every square foot had to be used to maximum efficiency. The solution to this problem was often the attic or loft, which was converted into a shared bedroom for several family members at once. When new children were born or relatives joined the family, coming from distant lands in search of a better life, the need for additional sleeping space became critical and required an immediate solution. This was the space directly under the roof slopes, where the ceiling height rarely exceeded 1.5 meters at its highest point. Accessed by a simple and very steep ladder, often made of roughly hewn logs. Sometimes, instead of a ladder, there were simply cutouts or wooden stakes driven into the wall, serving as makeshift steps, which over time became slippery from constant use. Climbing up required considerable agility, physical strength, and extreme caution, especially when carrying bedding or other items. In the dark, especially in the middle of the night, when it was necessary to go down for a need or because of some emergency, it turned into a real test of survival, and falls from a height of 2 or 3 meters were not uncommon, leading to serious injuries and even fractures. Despite all the obvious inconveniences and dangers associated with living in the attic, a sleeping place there was often considered a kind of privilege among children and young people in the family. It provided at least some semblance of privacy and physically separated them from the constant hustle and bustle, noise and arguments of the main room, where all family life took place. Therefore, it was usually occupied by older children who had reached adolescence or young adult family members who were already helping their parents with household chores. The opportunity to have one's own space, albeit tiny, where one could at least sometimes be alone with one's thoughts, was incredibly valuable in conditions of constant crampedness and overcrowding. Conditions in the attic were extreme at any time of the year and completely dependent on the vagaries of the weather and climate. In the summer months, the wooden roof, covered with shingles or bark, heated up in the sun and turned the loft into a real sweatbox, where the air became thick and heavy. It was extremely difficult to fall asleep in such unbearable heat without any ventilation or fresh air, and people often spent sleepless nights drenched in sweat. The temperature under the roof could reach such heights that people preferred to sleep outside under the open sky, risking encounters with wild animals or insects, just to escape the hellish heat inside the house. In winter, the situation changed dramatically, turning the attic from an oven into a freezer. The heat from the hearth did rise according to the laws of physics, but it escaped just as quickly through the numerous cracks in the roof and walls that appeared as the wood dried out. The attic became the coldest place in the whole house, where the temperature often differed little from the street and could drop well below zero. Sometimes in the morning, people found that the water in a wooden or clay cup at the head of the bed had completely frozen overnight, turning into a solid piece of ice. Drafts were a constant and unavoidable problem in any season. The wind blew freely under the roof through all the cracks and holes, blowing snow or cold rainwater directly onto sleeping people who could not protect themselves from it. Often, people would wake up on a cold winter morning under a thin but noticeable layer of snow that had blown in through the cracks in the roof during a snowstorm. They had to sleep completely covered with heavy blankets, leaving only a small opening to breathe so as not to suffocate under the pile of bedding. It was usually physically impossible even for an adult of average height to stand up straight in the attic. The low-sloping ceilings, following the lines of the roof, forced people to constantly move around, bent almost in half or crawl on their knees, which was extremely uncomfortable and tiring. There were often no beds as such, as it was impossible to carry them up the narrow staircase. People slept directly on the rough wooden floor, on mattresses stuffed with dry straw or hay, which had to be changed regularly. The attic floor consisted of rough planks laid haphazardly on supporting beams, often with large gaps between them through which one could see the room below and smell all the odors. Despite all these harsh conditions and obvious shortcomings, the loft was a truly important and indispensable part of the settler's dwelling. It allowed a large multi-generational family to live under one roof without disturbing each other more than was absolutely necessary. It was a simple, inexpensive, and yet surprisingly effective solution to the problem of overcrowding in conditions of limited resources. Without an attic, families of 8, 10, and sometimes 12 people of different ages would have had to huddle together in one cramped room without any possibility of privacy or personal space. Sleeping in the attic was another serious test that shaped the strong character of the first settlers and pioneers. From childhood, it taught them to adapt to extreme heat in summer and bitter cold in winter, to appreciate even the simplest amenities, and not to complain about difficulties. It was a real harsh school of survival and hardening right under the roof of their own home. Those who grew up falling asleep every night in a drafty attic in all kinds of weather became exceptionally resilient, steadfast, and completely unpretentious people, ready for any hardship. Space in a log cabin was truly worth its weight in gold, and the attic was just one of the possible solutions to the problem of lack of space. But how did the settlers cope with the complete lack of personal space downstairs in the main room? In the next chapter, we will talk about the concept of privacy, which was practically non-existent in their daily lives. In a one-room log house where the entire life of the family took place in a few square meters, the concept of privacy was almost unknown. Sleeping, cooking, working, and relaxing took place in full view of everyone. This shaped special social norms and relationships within the family. The main bed in the house, where the head of the family and his wife slept, was usually the largest and most solid. It served not only as a place to sleep, but also as a kind of status symbol in the center of the home. Its location was very important. Often, this bed was placed in the corner furthest from the entrance to create an illusion of security. It was the most honorable, but also the most public place. It was here that important decisions were made and family councils were held. The only way to create even a hint of personal space was with curtains. A simple fabric, homespun canvas, burlap, or an old blanket, was hung on a rope stretched across the ceiling. This curtain separated the bed from the rest of the room. Such an improvised canopy did not protect from noise or cold, but it created a visual barrier. Behind it, one could change clothes or simply hide from prying eyes. For people living in constant cramped conditions, even such a small thing was of great importance. In some homes, curtains were hung not only around the master bed, but also divided the entire space into zones. For example, they separated the sleeping area from the kitchen. This helped to bring some order to the chaos of a single room. The lack of privacy meant that all family members witnessed all aspects of each other's lives. This fostered tolerance, but also created a certain tension. It was almost impossible to be alone and enjoy some quiet time. When guests came to the house, the question of where they would sleep was easily resolved. They were given a place on the floor by the hearth or, if space allowed, on one of the beds with the family members. Hospitality was the law of the frontier, and no one was bothered by the cramped quarters. This way of life required people to have a completely different perception of personal boundaries. What seems unthinkable to us today was the absolute norm back then. Living in full view of everyone was part of collective survival. Thus, a modest curtain was not just a decorative element, it was a desperate attempt to reclaim a piece of personal space in an environment where everything was shared. It was a small symbol of human dignity amid harsh living conditions. As the family settled into their new home and their prosperity grew, the house changed. The first primitive log cabin eventually gave way to a more spacious and comfortable dwelling. This evolution was most evident in the sleeping quarters. The first step toward expansion was often the addition of another room or even a separate log cabin connected to the first by a covered passageway. This layout, known as a dog trot cabin, allowed for the division of living space. One room became a kitchen living room and the other a full bedroom. The emergence of a separate bedroom was a real revolution in everyday life. It meant that sleep was finally separated from other daily activities. This brought order, cleanliness, and, most importantly, privacy to life. Along with separate rooms, new furniture appeared in the house. Built-in wall beds were replaced by freestanding beds. They could be moved around, which gave freedom in interior design. Bed frames became more elegant. They were no longer made of rough logs, but of processed boards, often decorated with simple carvings. The bed ceased to be a mere utilitarian object and became a source of pride for its owners. Other pieces of furniture related to sleep also appeared. Chests for storing bedding and blankets were placed next to the bed. Small bedside tables for candles or books appeared. As prosperity grew, bedding also changed. Homespun sheets gave way to store-bought cotton ones. Quilted blankets became more and more elaborate, and the number of feather beds in the house increased. The family no longer slept together in one room. Older family members had their own bedroom, while the rest were accommodated in another room or in a more comfortable attic. This was the beginning of the formation of personal space as we understand it today. This transition from a one-room log cabin to a multi-room house could take years. Each new log, each new board was the result of hard work. The evolution of the sleeping area was a vivid illustration of the family's success and perseverance. Ultimately, the bedroom became a quiet haven, a place for rest and privacy. It symbolized man's victory over the wilderness.
Me too, my love.
The journey from a dirt floor to a cozy room with a bed and a chest was complete. In frontier conditions where dust and dirt were an integral part of life, keeping the bed clean was a difficult and time-consuming task. It was a constant struggle that required daily effort. The health of the entire family depended directly on the hygiene of the sleeping area. Mattresses stuffed with straw or leaves were particularly troublesome. The plant-based filling quickly wore down, turning into fine dust that seeped through the fabric. Therefore, daily shaking and airing of bedding was a mandatory ritual. Every morning, weather permitting, blankets, skins, and mattresses were taken outside. They were hung on a fence or simply laid out on the grass. Sunlight and fresh air were the main disinfectants of that era. About once a year, usually after the harvest, the contents of the mattresses were completely changed. The old matted straw was thrown away, and the empty fabric bag, or tick, was thoroughly washed in a large cauldron with lye. After a long drying process, it was stuffed with fresh, springy straw. Washing bedding, if there was any, turned into quite an event. It required a huge amount of water, which had to be brought from a well or river, and firewood to heat it. The process took a whole day and required enormous physical effort. Valuable feather beds required special care. They had to be beaten regularly so that the feathers did not clump together. From time to time, the feathers were removed, washed, and thoroughly dried to keep them light and fluffy. The wooden bed frames also required attention. They were regularly wiped down, and the cracks and joints were inspected. The cleanliness of the furniture was as important as the cleanliness of the linen. Dust was a particularly acute problem. Earthen or plank floors without carpets were a constant source of it. Therefore, wet cleaning in the house, as far as possible, was an integral part of bedding care. The lack of wardrobes meant that bedding was often stored directly on the bed during the day, neatly folded. Sometimes large wooden chests were used for this purpose. This protected the linen and blankets from dust and kitchen odors. This constant concern for cleanliness was not a whim, but a matter of survival. In the absence of medicine, hygiene was the best prevention for many problems. Clean bedding was the key to sound sleep and health, which were so necessary for the hard life on the frontier. The sleeping quarters of the first American settlers were not just furniture. They were a mirror that reflected their entire lives, their struggles, their hopes, and their achievements. The evolution from a dirt floor to a separate bedroom with a feather bed is a brief history of the frontier. The initial stage, sleeping on the floor in the corner of a single room, symbolized pure survival. The whole family, united in the face of wild nature and uncertainty, sought warmth and security in each other. It was a time when the main value was life itself and a roof over one's head. The appearance of the first built-in bed signified a settling down on the land. The house ceased to be just a shelter and began to take on the characteristics of a permanent dwelling. It was the first step from a nomadic spirit to a settled farmer's life. The rope bed became a symbol of engineering ingenuity and the pursuit of comfort. It showed that settlers were not just surviving, but striving to improve their lives using available technology. The wish, "Sleep tight," became the unspoken motto of the era. The contents of the mattress were an indicator of wealth: straw, leaves, horsehair, wool, and finally feathers. Each new filler marked another step on the ladder of success. A feather bed in the house was as much a sign of prosperity as a large barn or pedigree cattle. The struggle for warmth and cleanliness in bed reflected man's daily, relentless struggle with harsh conditions. Every clean blanket, every bed warmer, was a small victory of civilization over chaos. It was a routine that made up life. The emergence of separate bedrooms and the move away from communal sleeping signaled profound social changes. Families began to value personal space and individuality. It was a transition from collective survival to the formation of a more complex social structure. Thus, the history of sleep on the frontier is much more than the history of furniture. It is a story of human resilience and adaptability. It shows how culture, everyday life, and ultimately civilization are born from the most basic needs. We romanticize log cabins, seeing them as a symbol of freedom and independence. But it is important to remember the price that was paid for every hour of peaceful sleep within those walls. Behind every cozy picture was a harsh reality full of hard work. By studying how the pioneers slept, we can better understand them. Their beds tell us about their values: family, work, perseverance, and an unquenchable desire to build a better world for themselves and their descendants. And this story deserves to be heard. We see that behind the simple question, how did the pioneers sleep, lies a whole world of ingenuity, perseverance, and daily struggle. From cold dirt floors to soft feather beds, the journey was a true odyssey, reflecting the very spirit of the American West. Every detail, from rope nets to patchwork quilts, was not just an object, but part of a larger story of how people turned the wilderness into their home. These stories show that true heroism often lies not in grand deeds, but in the quiet, daily work of creating comfort and order where chaos reigned. The settlers' experience is a harsh but important lesson in how much labor and ingenuity went into the simple comforts we take for granted today. What aspects of American pioneer life would you like to see in future videos? Perhaps you are interested in how they prepared food, built tools, or defended their farms? Suggest topics in the comments, and maybe your idea will become the basis for our new research. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes.